Hi, this is Randall Schwartz, host of Floss Weekly. This week, Aaron Newcomb joins me. We're going to be talking about OpenStack Astara, a way for orchestrating many of systems in your OpenStack cloud. You're not going to want to miss this, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Floss Weekly is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Floss Weekly with Randall Schwartz and Aaron Newcomb. Episode 374, recorded February 9th, 2016. OpenStack Astara. This episode of Floss Weekly is brought to you by DigitalOcean, simple and fast cloud hosting built for developers. Deploy an SSD cloud server in 55 seconds. Try it today for free. Visit DigitalOcean.com, and once you sign up, be sure to enter the promo code FLOSS in the billing section to get your $10 credit. It's time for Floss Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I am your host, Randall Schwartz, Merlin at Stonehenge.com, bringing you each week, or as often as I can, the movers, the shakers, the big projects, the little projects, the projects you may be using every day, not aware of it, projects you may want to just download right after the show and play with. Don't do that if you're in the car, though. Important safety tip. Unless you have a self-driving car, then you could probably download it while you're actually still in the car. I digress, though. I'm speaking to you. First, most importantly, every week we have a co-host. This week is no exception. Welcome back, Aaron Newcomb, to the show.
Thank you. It's good. Nice to be back. I've been gone for a whole week.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and thank you for taking over the hosting slot last week, because apparently the bandwidth in the hotel that I was staying at was immediately bad. And we did a show that was sort of marginal the week before, and I just said, I don't want to do that 2 weeks in a row. So thank you for stepping in and
Sure.
being a host and everything, getting that all set up. And where are we speaking to you? Where are we speaking? I did it backwards. I've
Yeah, I
gone
know.
months without doing it backwards. Where are you speaking to us from?
I'm in my lair, my dragon lair here at home, where I get all my work done. We're both battling some light issues. It looks like I've got the light coming in now. I'm gonna have to. It's bouncing
Yeah.
off the house next door, so I'm gonna have to adjust my shades in a minute.
Yeah, as you might recognize, since the big mic is in front of me, I'm also at my Silicon Rainforest home, which usually is raining, but today is sunshine, and I hate days when I'm taping Floss Weekly on sunshine days. Luckily, the lawnmower man has just left, but he was making lots of noise. I kind of missed the lawnmower man in the actual show. Maybe he'll come back. Maybe he's just on a required break. Anyway, the show is not about us. The show is about projects and good things, all things Floss. And this week is no exception. We have on, scroll. If I don't do the show for 2 weeks, I really just forget how to do it. This week we have, no, I scrolled too far. There we go. Yeah, I did. No, where is it? I can't find it. There it is. This project is OpenStack Astara, which I know almost absolutely nothing about, except I can read you the first line on their homepage. Astara is a network orchestration service designed for provisioning neutron-managed virtual network functions in an OpenStack deployment. Well, we've had OpenStack and OpenStack-related projects on this show many times. Oh, there comes the sun. This is another project related to OpenStack, and the rest of that was all just buzzwords for me. So I think I'm really sort of out of my league. Can you interpret this any better than I just did?
Well, I don't know if I can, but I mean, OpenStack is so popular right now, and it's nice to see an ecosystem growing up around it, the way that it kind of did for Linux after Red Hat got started. All of a sudden, people, hey, this is a real thing. Let's jump in and start building, and it is a real thing. I mean, businesses use OpenStack and other services like this to build their own clouds, to do private cloud, to do all sorts of things. And because it's an open ecosystem, people really, I think, have learned a little bit about, not getting sucked into the proprietary models. And so they're saying, hey, I want to do this. And therefore, all these businesses are starting up, and all these great open source projects are coming in and trying to help people do things that maybe aren't as easy as they thought when they first took a dip in the pool.
Well, yes. Well, we could sort of, chat on all day about that. But yes, very important. The guest is none other than Henrik Rosendahl, and he's the CEO of Akanda, which is the main contributor of the OpenStack network orchestration platform project Astara. So he'll probably be the best person to try to interpret that first phrase that I just read. And so I don't think we need to chat more about that, but I do have a very important message to read to you, because Whether you're developing an app, a website, or working on a server-based project, you need flexible, reliable, and affordable hosting. DigitalOcean offers Droplets, which are virtual private servers that can be customized and deployed easily to host websites, web apps, production applications, personal projects, virtual desktops, and almost anything else you can think of with full root access. This helps you get your project off the ground quickly and makes it easy to scale when you find success. DigitalOcean is used by over 600,000 developers, including me. I found out about DigitalOcean last year at Scale, because we already had a Scale since then, and I immediately, they gave me a code to be able to sort of get some time on it, and I've been using it to build my FreeBSD applications and packages, so that's been really cool, and it's incredibly affordable. You can deploy and configure your Droplets via a streamlined control panel or a simple API, and you can choose your OS, Ubuntu, CentOS, Debian, Fedora, CoreOS, and FreeBSD. And that was the thing that really attracted me, because I hadn't seen any services like this before that had FreeBSD. You can select from one of many pre-configured one-clicks like Drupal, Docker, or Node.js to get up and running quickly, or build the exact infrastructure you need with root access to the servers, including 100% SSDs in state-of-the-art data centers around the world. It's highly scalable to meet the demands of a rapidly growing application or business. You can also use advanced features like floating IPs for high availability, private networking, and automated deployments via API. Your extremely active community with a large, detailed set of tutorials of all the ways you can use your Droplet. Want to configure a LAMP server, set up a virtual desktop or VPN? They've got you covered. And it's so easy to get started. You can deploy an SSD cloud server in as little as 55 seconds. DigitalOcean has incredibly affordable and straightforward pricing. Servers start at only $5 per month. Even pretty powerful little servers, too. $5, that's all they have to pay. And there's also hourly pricing available, starting at less than a penny per hour. But we're going to make it so you can get started today and deploy an SSD cloud server for free. Visit DigitalOcean.com and create an account. Once you confirm your email and account information, go to the billing section and enter the promo code FLOSS for a free $10 credit. That's plenty to get started and explore what DigitalOcean can do. That's DigitalOcean.com. And once you sign up, enter the code FLOSS in the billing section to get your $10 credit for free. We thank DigitalOcean for their support of Floss Weekly. And now let's go ahead and bring on our guest. Henrik, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Great. And where are you speaking to us from?
I am at my house in Napa Valley right now.
Oh, cool, cool. Obviously, I didn't know much about your project. Why don't you give us the 30,000-foot view and tell us what problem it's actually solving?
So Astara is the project name, the OpenStack project name. Akanda is the commercial entity behind it, and we are, the largest contributor to Astara. The project Astara is a virtual, sort of a software-defined networking platform that was spun out of DreamHost about 2 years ago.
Okay, and what's you said a software-defined networking? Can you describe what that is?
Yeah, so you can look at sort of the progression of software-defined networking. I mean, this is sort of the last big pillar in sort of in enterprise IT, where, obviously VMware started the whole virtualization trend about 12 years ago with virtualizing, servers. And then, 5 years ago came virtualizing storage. And now it's the time for virtualizing networks, right? So this is sort of the way of instantiating networks, setting up routers, firewalls, VPNs, and so forth, all sort of defined in software. Okay,
so at what point? I mean, if I've just got 5 hosts or 5 virtual hosts in some sort of cluster, does this start to be useful, or is there a sort of scale where I have to start worrying about this kind of stuff?
There's probably a scale, right? I mean, this as it spun out of DreamHost and their Dream Compute public cloud, and I would say once you probably reach 24 tenants or so, it's probably time to take a look at this. Obviously, we're in production daily with thousands of tenants and tens of thousands of virtual machines. So it's running on a fairly large scale. But at some point, if you're running a very small cluster, it's probably not worth it. But I would say probably 24 tenants, it starts sort of making sense.
Okay, and is this like a bolt-on on top of OpenStack, or is it something that's running inside OpenStack? Or I'm not sure how the relationship yet.
Well, this is, we're obviously, an OpenStack project, and we are leveraging Neutron highly. So we're using, all the APIs, both Neutron and Nova very extensively, and we are replacing some of the ways Neutron are doing things, such as some of the advanced services and the way that's configured. So in many ways, Astara was built to simplify the OpenStack networking. As you may know, it is now the most active project of all official OpenStack projects. And
Okay.
there's really sort of like a big push towards making it carrier grade, enterprise grade, and while doing so, also simplifying it.
Well, okay. So I don't know anything about Neutron. What is that?
Well, Neutron is basically the sort of the network engine or the network API of OpenStack, right? So that's basically driving the entire networking stack.
And that, again, I'm still pretty lost here. I know almost nothing about OpenStack or Neutron. I'm actually being a good proxy for about half of our audience right now. That's why I'm asking these kinds of questions. So
right.
I use that API to set up IP addresses and open up ports.
Yeah, right. So yeah, sure. So I mean, Neutron is sort of connecting to the physical network, right? So it's providing you a layer 2 in sort of network lingo, which is the physical network, and then providing an API for higher level services such as routing, firewall, VPN, load balancing, so on and so forth.
Okay, it's still. I'm just getting. Is there a more general way you can? But probably not. You're using a lot of terms like VPN and load balancing.
Sure, I mean
stuff.
those are all the VPN, firewall, and load balancing are all sort of like the higher level services that you would need in a sort of a large scale networking infrastructure. But it really all comes down to sort of the basic what's called layer 2. Which is sort of the fundamental network layer, right? It's basically the interconnectivity of hosts and virtual machines on them.
So I want to make it a little more practical here. So I'd have maybe a bunch of front-end web servers, maybe a bunch of databases, and they all have to know how to find each other, especially if you start doing scaling where they got to roll up, roll back. And Neutron or now Astara would be something that would as it spins up machines, tell each of them where their peers are?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So we're not actually, just to make that clear, we're not replacing Neutron in any way.
Okay.
We're basically adding on to Neutron and simplifying a bunch of the higher level services there.
And is Astara like a GUI? Is it an API? How do I interact with it as a network admin?
Well, as a network admin, your preferred way of interacting is CLI, right? And so all commands are CLI or API based. We did provide a UI to Astara and to our management platform. In OpenStack Horizon, which is the UI in OpenStack, but that's really more for visualization than anything else. At a larger scale deployment, you will always use CLI, of course.
So what does Astara bring to the table that I couldn't just do by writing my own Python script, for example? Last week we had libcloud on, which is a Python library, in case people missed it, that allows people to deploy cloud services and interact with cloud and all that kind of stuff. So what does Astara bring to the table? What can I do with Astara that would have been really, really difficult to do just on my own?
Well, fundamentally, there are a couple of areas that Astara shines in. One of them is that we are L2 agnostic, which basically means that you can choose between different underlays such as Open vSwitch, Linux Bridge, and on the more proprietary side, VMware NSX. So that gives you the choice of L2, and on top of that, you got a whole bunch of higher level network services. Starting from routing, but most often you continue down to up to load balancing and VPNs and basically managing the whole life cycle. So as a tenant comes online and says, hey, I want a new virtual network, we spin up a service VM that then connects to the physical network layer, and then provides a tenant network that is fully isolated. And then as you're bringing on extra services, we're managing the life cycle of those services. And, we're also letting all those services go through the health check every so often to make sure that they are running sufficiently. And if they're not running sufficiently, we will remediate those things. And so if you imagine having thousands of tenant networks, in play, this becomes a fairly cumbersome task to do manually. So we're automating all of that behind the scenes.
Well, and to that, I mentioned private cloud in my limited knowledge here of what's going on. But I mentioned private cloud because it seems like this is a tool that you'd probably use to set up private cloud like if I was a big company and I had a development team and they wanted to set up an environment to test out some application. It sounds like this is one of the tools you would go to, at least for the networking portion of that. Is that an accurate assumption?
Well, private or public, it doesn't really matter so long as we're talking about multiple tenants, right? So a multi-tenant cloud is really where Astara shines. And so whether that is private for enterprises, in highly regulated areas where they can't use public clouds, or whether there are sort of infrastructure of public clouds such as DreamHost and their Dream Compute public cloud, it's the same for us.
Yeah, I assume that since this came out of DreamHost, I think you said earlier, is this what companies are using this? Are they mostly cloud hosting or service providers?
Well, it's a combination actually. As we became an official OpenStack project in the fall, the uptake of customers both using it and contributing to it has really taken off. So we see kind of a mix 50-50 between both enterprises looking at this from a sort of a private cloud perspective, but also cloud service providers around the world as well as telcos.
You mentioned your official OpenStack project. What does that mean, or how does that happen?
Well, we're part of the big tent now, and it really happens based on you conduct yourself as a sort of a proper OpenStack project prior to becoming an official one. And so you do all your development meetings out in the open. You use IRC for your development meetings. You use Launchpad and other tools basically to provide blueprints for features and functions. And in many ways, you have to show that you can conduct yourself as an OpenStack project, and then you can apply to become an official project.
And I see that you mentioned this at the top that it's Astara is I think the open source project now. I think it all used to be just called Aconda. Mm-hmm. So what's the business model for Aconda? How does that work as the commercial entity, and then Astara as the open source project?
Right. So Astara is 100% open source, right, and will remain that way. And Aconda, like many other OpenStack, commercial companies are making money from supporting the code as well as providing professional services.
And how did you get involved in the beginning? Was this something I know you said it came out of DreamHost, but were you at DreamHost, or how in the world did you get involved with this project?
No, I was never at DreamHost. I met the CEO, Simon Anderson, who you interviewed, I believe, last summer here. And we talked about it. The project Ceph and the company Inktank spun out of DreamHost as well, and was sold about a year and a half ago to Red Hat. And I met Simon up in Tahoe a couple of years ago, and we talked about doing something similar with the project Aconda, which was basically developed internally in DreamHost since 2012. And we felt that there was a big gap in the market for simplifying SDNs. And really the first generation, to a large extent, actually made things more complicated. And that was a direct reason why DreamHost went ahead and developed Akanda internally, was to really try to simplify the daily operations of all these networks. And so we felt that there was a gap in the market, and that we should you try and go for it.
Did this come about as a fork, or was it basically just DreamHost said, we don't want to do this, let's move it over here?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like they don't want to do it, but we basically took the code and we didn't fork it, and then continue sort of iterating on it. And if you look at Stackalytics, you can see that DreamHost to this very day is the second largest contributor to the project after Akanda. So. Okay. Right, so it's we took over the ownership. We also have the PTL, Adam Gettleman, that works for Akanda. But mind you, DreamHost is operating their public cloud based on this, so they're just as vested in this platform as we are. Sure.
And I was just curious that people say, "Oh, it's a fork." That means there must have been some bad blood. This wasn't even a fork, but I don't mean, when I say fork, it's just like, well, someone took the code, and that's what you do with open source projects.
Sure.
Just so the audience knows. Some people think when I talk about forks, I'm dissing somebody. I'm not. It's just curious. Right. So what's the rule of thumb here for when I would look to this to get my network up and running? Is there a certain number of hosts that you target, or where do I cross that threshold?
Well, I think you cross that threshold when you evaluate OpenStack. Obviously, there are three main components that you need to look at. There is compute and what choice of hypervisor. There is the storage layer, and then there's the network layer. And so we come in in the network layer discussion. And a lot of companies that are new to OpenStack are going through this sort of evaluation process of, hey, how is Neutron, sort of stock Neutron, if you will, how is that working for us? And after a proof of concept or an initial sort of small deployment, they realize that it's quite difficult actually to operate at a larger scale. And so then they start looking around for projects such as Astara, which will help you basically orchestrate and manage your network at a larger scale. And that's really where we come in.
And in terms of resources I need to get this going, if I was thinking about setting this up, I'm imagine that since it's based on an open API and that it's an orchestration tool, I wouldn't necessarily need Big Iron to run this on, correct?
No, not at all. I mean, it plugs right into your existing infrastructure, right? And it's basically just deploying on the host that you already have.
Okay, so who are you competing with then? I mean, even though this is an open source project, there's always other commercial projects, perhaps other open source projects. Who else competes in this space for network orchestration on OpenStack?
I mean, there's a handful, I would say, of companies in this space. I mean, most notably, obviously, it's VMware and NSX, formerly known as Nicira, right? But it's almost mutually exclusive. If you're on a pure sort of vSphere infrastructure, you would go with VMware NSX, of course. And if you run OpenStack, it's kind of oil and water. And you most likely choose Neutron and Project Astara, right? So they are, while they're competing from a technical level and features and functions, they're almost mutually exclusive from a market and deployment perspective.
Hey, I'm still a little, maybe want to clarify a few things about the relationship between DreamHost and Akanda and Anaconda.
Right.
I didn't say it that way. I'm sorry. Versus Astara. So, yeah. So is Astara is completely open source. Is there a product that Akanda makes that goes beyond that and has proprietary parts?
No, it's all 100% open source. And so we don't have a product that is any different from what you can find on GitHub as Project Astara, right? So Astara is the project name, Akanda is the company name, and we are the main contributor to the project. And Akanda as a company is partly owned by DreamHost, by the founders, including myself, and also investors.
Okay, okay, that definitely clarifies it for me. So is DreamHost still using off-the-shelf Astara then, or is there local customizations there?
No, we're there are as close to the main branch as possible. So they're not off on their own. They're basically helping us prioritizing as well in terms of what's next.
Well, as they like the biggest customer, I presume that what
Yeah,
they
sure,
want kind of goes pretty high on the priority list, right? So
sure, of course it
I,
does.
and I was going to ask also then, who owns the copyright on the code? Is it still DreamHost or?
No, I mean it's all free, right? It's an Apache 2 license.
Oh, okay. And
so-
do you have a contributor agreement?
No, I mean yeah, I mean the standard sort of agreement under the Apache license, yeah.
Okay, okay. So you don't ever envision changing the license then, because you'd have to have the copyrights assigned over to be able to do that.
Exactly.
Okay, okay. I'm channeling Simon, who's great at these kinds of questions. He gets a little crazy sometimes. Says, well, what about this? Okay, well, I've got two more Simon questions to channel. So then, ultimately, Akanda decides the roadmap. Then,
Well, yeah, I mean we have the role of the PTL currently, right? But as a part of becoming an OpenStack project, we are willing to give it up if somebody else steps up to the plate and says, hey, we want to take the PTL role, and we are willing and able to contribute to this project, right? That's part of the game. So
Okay.
far we have the PTL, and as such we sort of decide what goes and what doesn't.
okay. Well, another acronym. Half of my audience just blanked out, which is PTL. What is that?
Well, PTL is Project Technical Lead. In other words, the sort of the main product manager for the project.
Okay, and I take it you've done more management than software.
Yes,
At least it seems like it. What is? Do you have a software background?
I do actually. I have an engineering background way back when. From the Technical University of Copenhagen. But then, as I moved my first startup over here to the States, I've sort of had a more commercial role ever since.
When's the last time you've written a line of code?
Oh goodness, probably in the early 90s.
Okay, well now I understand. I was playing.
I date myself.
Yes, right. Yes,
Right.
That's why I was playing buzzword bingo and winning a few minutes ago. I was like,
Right.
hey, how many? Okay, well that explains
If
a
you
lot.
remember, there is still a company called Magic, which is a simulator of VLSI or circuit board designs.
Right.
That was the last time I probably wrote any meaningful code.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a while back. Yes. I also understand you have an off-the-grid house. Can you talk about
that
that?
is true. Yeah, I'm sitting in it right now. So about 4 years ago, I started building what is now Napa County's first permitted off-grid house. Out of constraints in infrastructure, I have a 7,000-foot long driveway, which is the same as 1.2 miles. And so PG&E was kind enough to quote me $700,000 to put in power to my property. And I politely declined and started figuring out how I could do this from an off-the-grid perspective. And that was fairly new back then. This is 2010. And off the grid had been done sort of for small cabins in the woods and sailboats and such, but never really for a larger sort of modern house with flat screen TVs and server rooms and whatnot. And so that I went on that endeavor, and I write a blog about it so I can hopefully help other people do the same.
And is this primarily solar then?
Yeah, it's solar, and then 7 tons of submarine batteries in a shed out in the back to keep me afloat overnight, and for up to five days of sort of overcast, no sunshine. And then there's a propane generator that kicks in when various conditions apply.
And what's your typical draw in terms of, I guess, watts or amps, something?
Yeah, it's nothing, right? When you build a house, a whole new house, you obviously make sure that you choose all these sort of highly energy efficient components. So I would probably, if I was on the grid, have a $40 a month electricity bill, something like that.
Huh.
So it's very minimal, and that includes, you know, LED TVs, AC, you know, what have you.
Oh, we have a question for the chat room. Where can we find your blog?
It's called modernoffgrid.com.
Okay, yeah, cool. And also, Virgil asked, no wind turbines as a backup?
No, see, my property is visible from the valley floor here in Napa, and so the view shed regulations are very, very strict, which means that you can't actually put a wind turbine up that can be seen. And also the wind turbines generally, unless you're talking about the really large ones, require a 25-mile-an-hour wind to really actually produce any meaningful power. And that's pretty windy, and we don't have that here. Most days it's less than 10 miles an hour. And so, as the cost of solar panels dropped, you just basically buy a dozen more, and that's it. There's no voice, right? They're easier to maintain.
Yeah. So when DreamHost decided to make this an outside project, how did you choose it to be an open source rather than just a private company maintaining it outside?
Yeah. So DreamHost is 100% open source, which means that they are all about using open source tools, contributing to those tools, and it wasn't an option. This is how DreamHost conducts its business, and so it was very much in line with the thinking, and so we decided to go 100% open source, and we sort of went out to the market and tested the waters a little bit in the early days, saying, what do you think about an open core model versus an open source model? And there is definitely sort of the barricades come up when you talk about open core, because everybody knows that the 3 features that you really need to put this in production would be put over in the commercial version. And so in order to eliminate that obstacle, we said, hey, look, this is 100% open source. And it should remain that way.
And so, so we've got people from DreamHost contributing to the project. We've got a kind of people doing that. Have you had any other contributions not from those 2 groups?
Yeah, I mean, so as we became the OpenStack project, official OpenStack project in November, it's actually picking up, and you can check out Stackalytics, where you can see that both Huawei and HP and I believe Ericsson and others have contributed so far.
So I want to get back to the nuts and bolts of this just a little bit. How wide does this scale? I mean, we talked about there's a certain probably a barrier to get started. In fact, I think another question from the audience, I don't know if it was Virgil or yeah, it was Virgil. He says, would a home business be able to use this? So maybe that's part of this question. But so there's a certain barrier to entry here, I think, where it doesn't really make sense until you get past a certain scale. It's not for 1 or 2 hosts. But then what about the case where you have thousands of hosts or tens of thousands of hosts? Does it scale that high?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's where we're at today, production-wise, at DreamHost, right? So it both scales up and scales out. And so I would say, no, it definitely doesn't make sense for a small business, with a couple of hosts to look at Astara. But once you're designing and architecting like a large multi-tenant cloud, absolutely. Right. This project, for instance, was founded, natively with IPv6 support from the get-go, knowing that we would run out of IP addresses fairly soon, and so there's obviously some nuts and bolts to it to get it set, to get it installed and configured. But once it's done, it's fairly automated. We probably run north of 10,000 virtual machines today in one infrastructure.
Wow. So you have one instance, I don't know if you call it an instance, but one node, one Astara node or instance managing all of the networking infrastructure for that?
That's correct. And we're right now setting up a second data center as well. So, so yeah, it's sort of networking on a fairly large scale.
That's amazing. I mean, I was doing, when you were talking with Randall, I was doing some research on this, and I came across a blog which explained how to set up a single node in OpenStack, or different things you could do, I guess, to set up a single node in OpenStack. And it was just incredible to look at this web page. And maybe John can bring that up. There's the simple diagram, right? Which, I don't know, looks simple. But then when you scroll down on this website, it goes on for pages and pages of code and
Yeah.
CLI commands to set
Yeah.
up a single node. And here's how you set up DHCP. And there's, 15 commands for that. Here's how you set up. It's just crazy how much goes into this. And I know that, because I do this. I mean, you can go and you can script these things. You can tidy it up and make it neat and nice. But I mean, it's just incredible. This is a single node. And, we were kind of wondering, or I was kind of wondering, like, is this really necessary? Couldn't I just go out and do this myself? And it's like, wow, this is really complex stuff. And people that do this for a living, I used to work in a data center, and I know it's very difficult stuff to do. And it just goes to show you why a tool like this is necessary. There's something else on your website that I noticed called over the top paradigm. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so over the top, really, the trend, if you look back about 20 years ago, I mean, voice over IP was sort of like the first over the top service, right? That really, became, embedded in just the way we connect to each other, and now Netflix and other services are sort of over the top on top of on the carrier networks, and so this is an over the top networking platform that, and when we say that, we're basically referring to the fact that we are L2 agnostic, which means that you can choose Open vSwitch, or you can choose Linux Bridge, or even NSX as your underlay. In other words, as a project, what we're trying to do is leverage what's already in place versus replacing the sort of existing infrastructure and decisions made. The last thing enterprises want to hear is an open source project driven by a startup saying, just replace everything you have and do it our way, right? That's just not realistic. So we have to create a way of running on top of what's already there. Hence the over the top analogy.
And I read in part of your bio that you've done this before with other startup companies. Basically, have they all been open source, or is that something you always try to kind of strive for, or has it been more of a mixture?
No, Aaron, this is my first open source startup. The prior startups have all been traditional software, sort of proprietary software, and I was fortunate enough to sell 2 of them to VMware along the way, in the application virtualization space.
So in a sense, you're competing, and I guess that's the way it always works in business. But now you're competing a little bit with what VMware's putting out.
Right, you're competing with.
Yeah, that's always the case. So I mean, so this is open source. So why open source then? What have you learned, or given the fact that you've got a background in some proprietary software startups, what have you learned, or what do you like about the open source side of things?
Right. I mean, what's fascinating and really incredible about the open source movement is that you're having people and companies contributing, that would traditionally be competing. Right, we spend a couple of days at ONUC, which is the Open Network User Group in New York last summer, and all the Wall Street banks were there, and they're all contributing, and that would be sort of inconceivable 5 years ago, that they would all go off and do their own infrastructures and be very proprietary and guarded, because this is sort of part of their trade secrets, and now the very same companies are both contributing to the open source movement, but also using it and sharing. That's mind-boggling in many ways. But if you look at the project Astara, we have probably right now north of 35, 40 contributors to the project, and from a startup perspective, we couldn't afford hiring that many people from the get-go, right? And so having access to all these incredibly talented people that are working on other companies' dime is very fascinating to me. I quite enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's another aspect of from the opposite view. I mean, I usually talk to kids, whatever, people, developers that want to get started about using open source as a way to gain a platform. And you're kind of looking at it from the other side of the coin, which is, hey, I gain developers
Exactly.
in turn. So that's kind of an interesting take on it. A lot of times we talk about the ethical or moral reasons to use open source software on this show, but I think there's also some good business and personal development reasons to go with open source as well. So that's interesting. So in your new role, and especially working with OpenStack, I assume that you work with a lot of networking standards folks, OpenStack standards. Hey, we've got to set it this way. Just curious what your view is on standards bodies and how they come up with their view of the world.
Well, I think, the standard bodies in particular have a time and a place, and then, you either keep up or you sort of you fade out. Networking, I think, is undergoing a tremendous, shift right now, just like storage was 5 years ago and compute was 10 years ago. So I think, we'll probably see some of the traditional bodies fade in the background and some of the newer standards take hold, for sure.
So you told me before the show that you grew up in Greenland. What was that like?
My grandfather was appointed governor of Greenland, which is one of the back then colonies of Denmark, and by far the least desirable territory. And so, I have a long sort of family history there, and it's interesting. In many ways, it was a society in a tremendous transition. Right, you're taking a very closed society from before Second World War, and you actually had to have a permit to even enter Greenland back then, and then you open it up, and now it's a modern day society. So much like any other sort of indigenous people, they underwent a sort of a modernization in less than 2 generations, which is ugly. But today, hopefully they're better off for it.
Yeah, I was just on one of.
Right. Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
No,
Go
being
ahead.
a kid there, obviously, it's a very outdoorsy place, right? You can go hunting and fishing and kayaking, and I mean it's just it's a wonderful place to grow up when you're a small kid. But the lack of schools and definitely there's no universities. You have to come back and continue studying in Denmark or elsewhere.
It's I was just on one of my Insight cruises last summer, and we went to Iceland, and so there were experts on board talking about the history of Iceland, the history of everything around it. And one of the things that he said was there was some sort of the way Greenland got settled was, Iceland is very green, and he was trying to figure out, well, how do I expand and get more territory so I can do more operations? And he visited Greenland, and he named it Greenland so people would think it's even cooler and nicer than Iceland.
Yeah, so this actually, this is funny. This goes back to Harald Bluetooth.
Yeah,
which is the guy that actually named Bluetooth, or he wasn't, 1,000 years later, of course. But the Vikings set off, and they landed in Iceland. They were actually gunning for what is today Halifax in Maine. And if you look at a map, you can see that the first, if you set off from Denmark and the coast of Norway, the first place you will naturally bump into is Iceland. And Iceland is not terribly green, and it's not terribly habitable. It's really hard to grow crop there. So they were like, no, this is not a good place for us. And they continued in the search for what is today U.S. and Canada's East Coast. And they landed on the tip of Greenland in August, which is quite possibly the only month that tip is green. And otherwise, it's completely covered in ice. And they settled. They named it, Greenland because it was green for that month. And then they endured one winter, and then they were like, no, not very habitable. And they continued their journey and eventually landed in Halifax and Maine.
Cool, cool. Nice digression there, and I got to bring in a little bit of my own knowledge, which is cool. Anyway, we're almost out of time. Is there anything we didn't ask that you'll want to have tried to answer, or
I
of
think,
course you would
I
answer?
think
What
we've
try?
been around, many different sides of both Astara and other
Cool.
topics.
Cool. Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show and hopefully introducing Astara to the people who would make more sense about it than I would. And thank you for being here.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks very much.
Cool, cool. That was Henrik. Henrik. Where did that name go again? It's right there. Henrik Rosenthal. I should have just remembered that. Aaron, what do you think?
Oh, it's really interesting. I mean, working for NetApp, we do a lot with OpenStack. We have a whole team dedicated to it, and so now I'm going to go back to them and say, "Hey, do you guys use Astara for anything? You ever use that?" Because it is really interesting, and it's solving a business problem. And it's solving companies want to get into the cloud. They want to develop their own clouds or be a service provider, and they look at all the different options. They look at OpenStack, and and once you get to scale, you're going to need something, as we showed just from that one blog, that can handle managing all these various networking functions that you want to throw out there, spin up, tear down, all of that stuff. And so it's really interesting, and I'm really glad from another aspect too. Working for a commercial company, I feel like I can say this, that there's a lot of commercial companies that jumped on board OpenStack in the beginning, and it almost started to look like the commercial entities were going to kind of try to take over it a little bit or dictate what happens inside of OpenStack. And it's good to see an open source project, and there's plenty of them out there, but it's good to see an open source project come out and say, hey, we're going to play in this space as well, and we're going to stay open source and do it the right way, in my estimation anyway. So I'm excited about this. We'll see. It's obviously doing well for a number of people, including DreamHost. So I think it has a bright future. We'll have to see how well it does.
And remind me now, since you're obviously more of an expert in OpenStack than I am, even though I did many interviews about it before, it all seemed to be gone today. OpenStack sort of unifies the interface, so you could drop it onto AWS or put it in your own cloud or put it on DreamHost and stuff. Does it sort of unify the interface for that?
It doesn't necessarily unify the interface, but it is its own cloud system. So they define their own. So they have a storage system that they define, and here's how it's going to run. And then they have a networking system, and they have a compute system, or several of them, that say you're going to run this type of host, and it's going to look like this. And so it's all set up in a standard way, and it is its own cloud infrastructure. And then you can use various APIs to communicate with it to set up your compute hosts and various things. So it's its own cloud system in and of itself.
Okay, so you would either have to run a private cloud or or go to one of the existing cloud systems that has an OpenStack deliberate setup thing.
Yeah, exactly. You can do that, or you can, this starts out with the company saying, look, we want to have our own cloud. We want to have cloud services. Maybe we want to be a service provider. Like, we want to be our own Amazon, right? And we want to, maybe you're like a Verizon or an Orange or one of those places. And you say, look, we want to set up our own cloud infrastructure and then offer out to, our customer base the ability to start up their, use our cloud services as an alternative to Amazon or someplace else. Maybe they offer some unique function or feature or security measure that you might not get from those big open players like Amazon or SoftLayer or Azure. So you would pick up OpenStack because it's a model that you can deploy, right? That's what you're looking for, is a model. I want to do this in a standard way so that everyone knows how to use it and so that it looks consistent to someone coming in and wanting to use my stuff. So that's when you go out and you say, oh, look, OpenStack, I can pick up OpenStack and deploy that inside my infrastructure and then offer those services out to my customers.
Ah, cool, cool. All right. Well, I learned something new every day. I learned about 4 or 5 new things today, so that's pretty cool. Well, coming up our next week, we do have H Ledger, which is Ledger in Haskell. We had Ledger on many years ago, I think by now, man, with almost 10 years of shows. It's like I can't even remember when things were on anymore. Usually I Google it. So I go, Floss Weekly Ledger. It's just the only way I remember if we've done it, which often I don't know. Somebody will say, have you had something on the show before? And I don't know. I don't remember. I'm getting old. Well, the first question is why re-implement Ledger, which is a double entry accounting system that's in use actually by the Software Freedom Conservancy to do all their bookkeeping, which is kind of fun. And the second is why Haskell? I don't have any clue why any. Sorry for all the Haskell listeners. Now you're not going to tune in because I just upset you. Anyway, so H Ledger coming up next week. Open AV Productions, which is a musical synthesis synthesizer and performance system. It's as much as I wrote notes down about, but hopefully I'll go research that before we get that up there. ToroDB, I met these guys at Scale, and it's really sort of fascinating. So everybody wants MongoDB because MongoDB is web scale, right? So if you haven't watched that video, Google MongoDB web scale. You'll really enjoy it if you haven't done that before. But it's basically the MongoDB wire protocol talking to a shim that then puts everything in Postgres as a back end. Now you think, okay, there's a bandwidth mismatch there. You're not ever going to get all the features of MongoDB in terms of scaling and failover and everything like that by having Postgres in the back end. But it turns out that on hardware for hardware, the same hardware, actually the same machine, this ToroDB runs 5 times faster. 5 times. And that's because there's been so much work put into Postgres to make it fast over the decade or two that it's been around, that this actually works really slick. Not quite ready for production, but actually by the time we bring him on, he says he's probably going to get close to announcing his 1.0 release, which is going to be really nice. We just added to the schedule. Jan Leonard wrote me. He was back on the show in 2008 talking about CouchDB. Well, he's just released CouchDB 2.0, which if you want to go back and listen to the show back then, or if you're using CouchDB, it's a JavaScript accessible database. So it's one of these sort of no SQL databases, but accessible with REST calls. So you can actually write a full web app by talking directly to having this running in the back end. Well, 2.0 is coming out. And then on top of that, built sort of on top of 2.0 and bring in some other components, Node.js and things like that, he's got Hoodie. And that's easy back end for front-end developers. So if you're a front-end developer and you don't want to talk, have it, but it's the whole soup to nuts for the back end, which is going to be really cool. We're actually going to do 2 shows back-to-back for that. So Jan will be a double header coming up shortly. We still have a couple slots open for Q1, but I've got a couple of people looking at dates, just busy chatting with them about all that. If you want to see where I am on the big spreadsheet, that's the homepage for this show is twit.tv/floss. And from there, there's a link to see who's on the upcoming guest list. If you have a project that is not on that list, if you're the project leader, email me, merlin@sunhenge.com, and I'll get you on. Or if you're just somebody who's a fan of a project, email the project leader or the community coordinator and have them email me. So just don't tell me the project name. It takes too much work and it'll never get done. So please have the people contact me, and then I'll make sure they get on the list. We have a live stream, which we took a couple questions from. No, we didn't take questions from the live stream. We have a live stream at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time on Tuesdays at live.twit.tv, and there is a chat room there, and we take questions from the chat room for almost every show. You can follow us at Floss Weekly on Google+, which automatically retweets to Floss Weekly, at Floss Weekly, all one word. You can follow me at Randall L. Schwartz on Google+. That's my primary blogging platform right now. That retweets over to Merlin, M-E-R-L-Y-N. I don't have anything to plug right now. I don't have any trips where I'm going to be public anytime soon. What do you have to plug there, Aaron?
I am going to be public. I'm going to be public tomorrow on This Week in Google. Very public show. If you, I only say that because Jeff Jarvis wrote that book, Public Parts. So it's kind of if you're a fan of the show, you'll get the joke. Nice. But I'll be on This Week in Google tomorrow, Wednesday, 1 p.m. if you want to tune in live. And I'm going to bring a project. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it's going to be. I always try to bring a project instead of showing off an app or a number or something. So I'll be bringing that. You will be bedazzled. I'll just leave it there. Awesome. And then you can follow what I do on Google+. Of course, I'm Aaron Newcomb there. And if you're in the Bay Area and you want to come to a great makerspace, you can come to Benicia Makerspace or come to our Maker Fair, which is on April 16th. It's BeniciaMakerFair.com. You can go there to buy tickets, and it's a great small maker fair, not like the big one. A lot of people find that too, crazy. But if you just want a small fair showing off local makers and what they do, you can come by Benicia Maker Fair on April 16th. So I guess that's all. That's enough plugging for me.
Awesome.
Oh, and
awesome.
by the way, happy Chinese New Year.
Oh, yes.
I forgot to mention that. I was going to mention that at the top, and I totally blew it. So happy Chinese New Year.
And I noticed you didn't mention anything about Groundhog Day on the last show.
Oh, you know what? I almost did. I was reading that right before the show started, and I thought maybe there's a way to fit this in here somehow, but yeah, I couldn't do it. I couldn't make it work right. So
That's good. That's good. It's okay. It's okay. Well, again, Aaron, thanks for stepping in at the last minute to be the co-host for this, and thank you again for hosting last week's show at the last minute. You're my last minute hero.
woohoo! I get the gold star.
Yes, right, right. Yes, cool. Thank you, and thanks to all of you for listening to the show, participating as you do, and or watching the show. In which case, you got to see the sunlight go right across my face today again. So, if you only listen to the show, you're missing out on a little bit of stuff, not much usually. So, you missed out on that cool diagram though, and all that text. Because so you might want to play back that part on your just the video of that. So there, and now I'm just basically rambling. So we should say, as I always do, we'll see you again next week on FLOSS Weekly.